Welcome and thank you for checking in at the Inner Game of Change podcast, where I focus on exploring the multi-layers of managing organizational change. My guests cover a diverse number of critical topics to enable effective and sustainable change in the workplace. My name is Ali Jaman, and you're listening to the Inner Game of Change podcast. My guest today is Michael Brown, an award-winning author, a CEO, a wonderful human, and so many other great things. A respected international author of the Gold Award-winning book, I Don't Agree, and a tenacious CEO who tries every day to live his values and deliver community value. I'm grateful to have Michael discussing his book with me today. So, Michael, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining the Inner Game of Change podcast. I really appreciate your time.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Ali. Absolutely. Looking forward to what lies ahead. I've got your questions. I'm slightly intimidated by them.
Today we're going to discuss your book, I Don't Agree. And fascinating book, really relevant to nowadays where disagreements seem to be left, right, and center. Nothing is new about disagreement, but I think you've explored different aspects of it. And I was fascinated also how you went through the pain of working out the number of hours for a child all the way up to, year 8? And which made me really think about myself, 53-year-old man, how many times did I disagree? So from the beginning, who did you write the book for?
Well, it's interesting, that one, Ali, because who I started writing it for definitely did change. And it arose out of, I guess, my own predisposition to conflict. So I guess I've enjoyed conflict in the past. And by that, I don't necessarily mean physical conflict. I'm not built for that. I mean just conflict in business scenarios, and of course, it's in many ways conflict and disagreement is vital, not just in business but in life, because it's a powerful agent of change, providing you harness it correctly, and also understand that it's perfectly acceptable for others to disagree with your worldview,
sure.
no matter how assertive you put your worldview. So that was interesting, but it arose out of an incident actually in a business that I ran for over and founded, or more correctly refounded, took part in a management buyout, and I ran it as the MD with two other shareholders for 10 years, and all of those people were big characters, shall we say, no shrinking violence, and I guess what you would ordinarily understand to be, the everyday boardroom disagreement about the direction of the enterprise actually amplified over the course of time into what you can only really describe as a power struggle about whose view was the right thing, and which direction should we pursue. And it became a difficult thing. And that did materialize one, I was going to use the word fine day, but it was far from fine, in a spectacular fallout with my fellow shareholders on the office floor in front of all the people who worked for us. It certainly wasn't very dignified. Nobody came to blows, but it was heated. And I guess, and I know, and I use the phrase in the book, it was compelling viewing, if you like, for those people around us. But obviously there was no going back from a moment like that, and everything that we'd sort of built sort of fell away to ashes, really, in the aftermath of that. So, a business that we'd all given so much to became an untenable thing based around those personalities and those differences of opinion. And of course, when something like that happens, especially when it threatens the future of your young family, it certainly threatens the future of the team you'd built around it, then it would only be right, wouldn't it, to enter into a period of self-reflection. And in particular, certainly for me anyway, was to look at my own fault in those disagreements that led me there, and realizing that actually contemplating more correctly, did my business partners have a view in and opinions that were just as valid as mine, and accepting that. And of course, they did. But it took me a while to get there.
Yeah.
And I think it takes most people a while to get there in any disagreement, because one of the things I unearthed in my period of self-discovery was this psychological phenomena that's been labelled by psychologists since the 1950s called attribution bias. And that is where the people either side of an argument tend to blame the deadlocks that arise in that negotiation or disagreement on the other side. So, and that is done by both sides. And if you think about that, that is a really mad thing. Both sides are blaming the other, and they can't see their own faults in that. So, and that's called attribution bias. And at the same time, it works the other way. So any credit that accrues in the breakthrough, if there is a breakthrough in those negotiations, is also claimed by both sides.
Yes.
That can't be the fact. So you've definitely arrived at it collaboratively, but you're taking the credit. And that is this phenomenon called attribution bias. And I guess my failure there was a failure to recognize my own attribution bias and to intellectually get around that. And then that led me to the book. And I just thought, well, if I'm failing in just that one psychological phenomenon, what else might there be? And then that started to alight on an idea for a book, which was about this sort of perspective taking, but in totally non-academic, completely layperson's terms, because there was none of that. To properly understand psychology, social sciences, you have to be an academic, and most business people aren't that. Although there are plenty of academics in business, of course. So it was that journey. So it was originally, to answer your question in a long-winded way, Ali, apologies.
No.
It was originally intended for other, I'm going to use the word leaders, and I'm not describing myself as such, but for other business leaders, entrepreneurs, anyone interested in management, anyone interested in conflict negotiation, and of course, again, accepting the fact that conflict might be vital to doing good business. So it started off as that, but then as I got into the book, I thought, oh, well, maybe this is wider than that, because it became, I looked at it as so you could attribute the culture of the business to the personalities of the individuals. And then if you look at business culture in a wider context, it would be difficult not to arrive at the view to say most of it is flawed. And if that wasn't the case, and this is my argument, there wouldn't be phenomena that exist, such as the gender pay gap, inequality at work, the wealth gap, plastic in our seas, 0 hours contracts, unconscious bias, institutional racism. They wouldn't exist if business culture by and large wasn't flawed. So then I got to thinking, well, maybe the book could help to save the world. And this is arrogant, and I know it, and I apologize. But because by dint of the fact that all human endeavor is organized, then it may follow that if you sort out organizational culture, then you can save the world. And I thought, and I started looking at the book in that sense. So it became a 10-step guide for anybody who wants to sort out the culture, not just at work, but in family and in their communities, and of course in wider society. And again, it was a lay person's approach to doing that. And hopefully it connects in some way, shape or form in that context.
Was certainly connected with me, Michael. I got a lot out of it. As I mentioned to you before before we started recording, I'm a realist. I understand that tension and conflict is part of the game, especially at work. But I also am a believer that whether we are conscious of it or not, there are more things that we have in common than what we tend to believe. But there are things that get in the way, like ego, like pride, there are intention, ambition. All of those things get in the way, and sometimes we just don't like the other person. But even when we say we don't like the other person, there's certainly underlying reasons behind it. If you sit down and think about it, you will find out that there's always going to be some realistic reason behind it as well. Is there power in disagreement?
Yeah. Before I get there, Ali, I just want to touch on that bit about you sometimes don't like the other person.
Sure. Yeah.
Chemistry is an interesting thing, isn't it? But there was, and this is going back to some of those phenomena that I listed, particularly things like unconscious bias, institutional racism, and that because we are primed, in evolutionary terms, to distrust people who are dissimilar to us. And so you do notice that if you kickstart any kind of an endeavor, whether that's a business or it's a band or a political party, or it often takes a single-minded catalyst, doesn't it, who gathers together a small collection, if you like, of like-minded souls and individuals to get it off the ground. So we sort of gravitate, if you like, to people who think like us, act like us, and also look like us. And there was a whole load of research that I did a lot of, as I said, in the prep for the book, because I'm not an academic, I had to do a whole load of it, which became a fascinating exercise, a whole load of reading and research and stuff, and looking at academic works. And there was a fascinating bit of research, which was called "Not Like Me Equals Bad," and it was done by a collection of academics from University of British Columbia, I think, Chicago University, Yale, and in that it said that adults have a liking for people who are similar to them. So that was the opening note. So, I mean, that's not earth-shatteringly new opinion. It sort of makes sense, doesn't it? It's shown, for instance, that people tend to choose partners that they believe to be of similar physical attractiveness to their own. And we sort of all get that, don't we? And I think I do refer to this in the book, because it's why we all smirk when we hear the backhanded compliment that somebody's punching above their weight in the dating place. They've broken the rules of attraction. But there was a darker side of that. And this was really fascinating stuff. And again, it's about what's the instinct versus how you have to intellectually work your way around these things. So dissimilarity was a high predictor for the avoidance of others. And there's loads of other clinical research that's referenced in the particular work that I allude to. Proves time and time again that we hold positive expectations of people who look and act like us, and we anticipate they'll be more fairer, more trustworthy, and more intelligent than those who are different to us, which is mad. Think about that. So according to that research, there's an evolutionary compulsion to distrust or think people are less trustworthy if they happen to be different, and that does, without justifying it, could go some way to explaining for instance, institutional racism or just outright prejudice. And again, it's acknowledging that you may harbour yourself, no matter how you aspire, what your worldview, how the person you aspire to be. There may be something in there you harbour, and it's about acknowledging that, recognise it, and then thinking, well, what do I do to, if you like, defrock myself of those sorts of evolutionary triggers to therefore pave the way for better relationships, I suppose, better collaboration, better negotiations. So that was interesting, really.
Great.
And in getting to there, I've forgotten the question, Ali. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. I was asking if there's power in disagreement.
Is there power? Yes. Well,
is there a benefit in disagreement? Because you would assume that disagreement, meaning you've got a different point of view, and therefore you've got another way of looking at things.
Yeah, no, that absolutely. So it's sort of disagreement can be a creative exercise, can't it?
Yes.
So it's undoubtedly powerful. It's certainly, it's an agent for change, isn't it? So, if society or politics or governments become so unjust that there's a sort of righteous anger that arises from that, and then the power is switched. We see that, don't we, in all revolutions. So disagreement is necessary to keep power in check, isn't it? In one sense, and that just doesn't mean geopolitical power. It means power in all of our relationships, doesn't it? So it's certainly a powerful tool, if you like, and obviously we can see why it's we've evolved to disagree. But the thing is, in trying to get things done, it's how the disagreement is positioned, how it's couched, how we work through it together. And I guess what the world needs for me right now is a sort of a new conscientiousness. A new consciousness would be more correct. That sort of recognises compromise, if you like, not as an individual loss or concession of ground, but as a collective victory that will lift us all, that benefits all parties on every side of an argument. So you can still say, I don't agree. It won't stop you from being a successful leader. You can still say, I don't agree, and it won't stop you from getting promoted. And you can still say, I don't agree, and it will help you be a better partner. So it's definitely the powerful thing, but it's how we measure it. And so not how, it's how we do it that counts. So it's not retreating back to the bubble, if you like, and I'm referring there to the infamous bubble of social media, where you venture out of that, you assertively proclaim your point of view, you then generate all of the counter arguments against that, expressed also in a sense, and then retreat back to your bubble where everybody thinks and acts like you. So that's not the best way to do it.
Which can be a counterproductive anyway, especially in the workplace, because sometimes some people get so blinded by the disagreement that they go to extra efforts just to prove somebody's wrong.
You're right, Ali, absolutely right. And you may recall there's a little psychological model by a couple of academics called Tavris and Aronson, who wrote this book called Mistakes Were Made, but Not By Me. So it's a funny title. But they've got this model where they try to explain how disagreement arises by very tiny degrees, and they called it the pyramid of choice.
Yeah.
And I try to, simplify that in the book, because obviously
I think he called it tension creep.
I call it tension creep. So that's something I'd labelled well before I was aware of Tavris and Aronson's pyramid of choice model. So how tensions tend to sort of creep and then amplify. And they gave me a sort of model for it. And I'll try and explain it. So and in the context of workplace environments where you've got two colleagues who are stood right at the pinnacle of the pyramid, and they have a minor disagreement, for instance, about how some aspect of their work gets done. And in that minor disagreement, so it's just they just step one step down. You think about the pyramid, you start standing at the top of the structure and it gets wider as you get to the bottom. So one of the colleagues goes down the other side, just incrementally, and then the colleague goes on the other one. So they're a little bit further apart. And at that point, and this goes back to my earlier phenomena of which I described about attribution bias, they tend to look around for other people who will back up their worldview, to look for evidence.
Yeah, they go on a recruitment drive.
Recruitment drive to find that, and also ignore, again, going back to attribution, the evidence that the others may have on the other side of that pyramid. Yeah. And in so doing, you incrementally down that pyramid until you get, you transverse to the bottom of it. And of course, when you're at the bottom of the pyramid, but on different planes of it, you're really, really wide apart. And I thought that was a really interesting explanation as to how tension, it creeps in and gets wider and wider and wider as we all look for evidence to support our own views. And all of us willfully don't look to take perspective, to look at the other person's worldview and say, how did they arrive at that? Are they that different from me? But our opinions are so polarized. And again, it's that intellectual investigation where you try to override your emotions, your own faults, your own biases. And so disagreement is a powerful thing. Recognize, again, going back to the catalyst that spurred the book, I didn't recognize my own faults in the disagreement that led to that particular business falling to pieces. But it set me off positively on the journey towards the book. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Yeah. So there's a couple of questions for you, Michael. One, whose responsibility is it to manage disagreements? Is it the people that have the disagreement, or is it the business managers, or is it a collective responsibility?
Good question. And it's tempting to say all of the above, isn't it? Of course it is. But I think it's linear for me. So I think it starts with the self and a proper examination of the self. And then within that, a check, if you like, on your true motivations, and because it is very easy to be honest with yourself, even though you may not admit your failings to those people around you, even your nearest and dearest. So I think it definitely starts with the self. So what is my true motivation here, and what is the outcome I want to achieve? And then there's a responsibility there, isn't there, to look at the other people on the side of the table, accept that there are some differences there, but also to try and examine what it is that brings them to that perspective, and to try and put yourself in their shoes. And that's, the person-to-person thing, but also then in collective negotiations where you've got group dynamics that come into play. Then there are some acceptances, really, about the difficulties of collaboration really, and how difficult that can be as a group exercise, and learning a bit more, I guess, about that really, in that because once you get to group negotiation, then it has to be about. Collaboration has to come into its own, doesn't it? And the interesting thing about humanity is that we evolved to compete and we also evolved to collaborate. But collaboration in and of itself does spring from, in evolutionary terms, from the drive to compete, because collaboration is about embedding yourself into a group by being helpful, by taking part in what you might think of as altruistic behavior. And then if that person becomes valued in the group because of that particular quality, they have those collaborative qualities, helpful qualities, then that, of course, helps to preserve the survival of the individual and the prosperity of the individual. So is there a genuine altruistic nature to collaboration? I don't think science has solved that particular argument. And the thing about competitive, they're like tectonic plates, aren't they? Competition, collaboration, that they're always grinding up against each other to create heat. And in trying to understand more about that tectonic action, if you like, there's a whole load of research about collaboration in context of business, and there was one that I alighted on, and it hasn't got a very snappy title. It's from 2015, and it looks at 106. I think it was UK and US based companies over a period of 6 years, so a long study. And it was, the title is not very memorable. I'll try and repeat it, but it's the socio-structural view of resistance to relational strategies. So, but by relational they mean collaboration. Yep. So it's not got a snappy title, but it's a critical read really. And there was and that study, there was some stuff that arose out there that I think are pertinent to my argument. And one was about tarnished reputation, and the second was interesting about territoriality. And I'll just deal with the tarnished reputation. It's less relevant for this conversation, but it was about the leaders and managers were struggle to assess in advance the true value of any collaboration. So no clear goals being set at the outset. What do we want to achieve? And in business terms, that resulted in poor returns on investment, and it sort of tarnished the reputation, if you like, of future collaborations. So that's one thing. I thought that's an interesting thing and probably worth another book in itself. But the other one, pertinent to I don't agree, was this notion of territoriality. And it was so 73%, and that's the exact maths, of the companies that participating in that research, I'll try and find out where the academics were from that, but they described turf wars as the most problematic barrier to effective collaboration and resolving disagreement. And there was a whole load of evidence that showed how the partners in the collaboration could not break out of their siloed mindset to make collaboration happy. And there was one anecdote that really there was a load of anecdotal stuff from the participating managers. And there was one that resonated with me, and a fairly senior leader in that from one of those companies. And he or she, I can't remember, male or female, people are more concerned. So this is a direct quote. People are more concerned about who will get the glory or the blame if things go wrong in the collaboration, rather than the motives behind the collaboration itself. And I thought that was really, really interesting. Yeah. And also, says a lot, doesn't it, about human nature, really. And again, sorry to wang on about this. Do you know that term, wang on? It just means, when you just back, you go. Yeah. I
sort of understood that, Michael.
Yeah. Yes.
You're behaving it already, so I understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, it was just I did try to I'm since no longer I've moved on. I've started a new enterprise, but in the business the business I last ran, or helped to run more correctly, there was a lot of people involved in that, nearly 4,000 people, and we got into this. Or I sort of drove this sort of values outing exercise, but it started with some research about the people in the business, and you may remember this from the book, because these are the exact maths, but I was quite interested about how people come into organizational life. Do they actually arrive as a team player?
Yes.
And of course, if anyone got asked that in an interview, and any of us would make the intellectually right
Of course,
choice.
I'm a team player.
Yeah, of course you would. Yeah,
yes.
It'd be career suicide, wouldn't it, to say anything other?
Yeah.
Well, what about your instincts? Do they scream something else? Because that word collaboration and teamwork, it gets bandied around organisational life all over, doesn't it? So I asked participants across those. There were 3 businesses altogether, so all in media and advertising, to recall their first day on the job or coming into the building, if you like. Obviously, this was before COVID, when people don't come into buildings anymore. Anyway, but and did they come to the role thinking of themselves as team players? And 77, so the significant majority, 77.5, and that's the exact math, claimed yes, always. Now, 20% of them, a little over 20%, said yes. And this was telling, I think, but only sometimes. So getting a bit more honest there, if you like, which is, of course, it's revealingly flexible. It suggests they only play ball when it's advantageous to do so. So definitely evolutionary behaviour in nature.
Yeah.
And then there was a very slim minority who, and this is exact, it was 2.55% who admitted an outright no none of the time. So obviously they were honest, brutally so. So then I was thinking, well, how can I check that everybody's being honest here? So I tried to cross-section that, and you can pick holes in the research, and also thinking about the sorts of people. And we'll come back, but what I mean is obviously working in media and advertising, and there's certainly, you could in generic terms say that does attract a certain sort of person. Whereas if you may look at healthcare or in the NHS, for instance, that again may attract by and large different characteristics. But anyway, so I asked if on that first day, so they'd already answered the questions about teamwork, if they also imagine themselves getting promoted in the future, and 79% of them, so more than that, said that they were team players. Yes. And even more intriguing for me anyway was that 48%, so nearly 50%, said they imagined working their way to the role of CEO all the way to the top. And I just thought that was interesting, because promotion, it elevates you above your colleague. And if you think about that jars against the success of a team, which demands, doesn't it, that everyone accepts
collective
equal reward. Yeah. So it raised that question: is it possible to be truly collaborative if you also seek personal glory? Let's say. I thought that was just an interesting view. So once you begin to understand more about human nature, you can enter into negotiations and disagreements in a slightly different way. Context of what is my role here? I am a human being. Genes, I've inherited the same evolutionary compulsions as everybody else.
Yes, so, yeah. Which takes me actually, because I was thinking about this whilst reading your book, if there's a correlation between competency and disagreement. So competent people, which you would assume they might be slightly more ambitious, will they find it easier to disagree and voice their disagreements rather than incompetent people? What's your observation?
It depends because competency is it can be applied to all sorts of things, can't it? So I may be incompetent at disagreement, but I might be competent at my job. So
So if I'm a successful player within the team, I meet my performance targets, I meet my KPIs, I'm ambitious, I make it clear to the organization that I would like to progress, I go above and beyond. Will these people be more at ease to disagree because they've got certain ways of working and certain ways of thinking that actually got them to be successful in the first place?
Yeah, so absolutely. So I guess what you're saying is that is linked to ambition, and in that there's a sort of disagreement with an internal disagreement, I suppose, where you're, let's call it, not happy with the position you are in life potentially, but certainly in your place at work. So I guess in that you could say, I feel because of these achievements of these KPIs, I therefore now need to be accelerated into a higher role at a higher pay bracket. And of course, in thrusting that forward, then you would be more competent, I guess, in managing your internal disagreement and channeling it outwards to get people, or the managers and leaders, to agree with you, wouldn't they? So
usually you will have your own ideas that you want to push through, and your own, which also will mean that you've got your own agenda because you want to progress, and you're probably taking more risks as well. So anyway, it's a point that I've always, I mean, when I reflected on all the people that I worked with in my career, and then the people that really were disagreeable most of the time, they had a bit of a competency. Well, the competency aspect was there. They were actually good performer.
Yeah. And again, I think I can get towards an answer for this now, because I think what you're driving at, for me anyway, and certainly as someone who's been in a leadership role, is that you're looking at the culture of the business. So what is acceptable to the culture? And of course, culture is shaped by values. Very often, of course, values emerge sort of organically, if you like, around the personalities of the business founders. And they're never really formalized in a framework until later on. But it is incumbent upon any leader to give some thought as to what are the values, and therefore what is the type of culture that I want. So is my culture the thrusting, ambitious type, or is my culture more collaborative, in which case then individuals like those you described may not be, maybe to the detriment of the culture, even though as individuals they may be beneficial to the bottom line, I suppose.
Hi there. Thank you for listening to this podcast. For more podcasts, check us out at theinnergameofchange.com.au. Yeah, because sorry, Michael, I think what I've always been thinking about this is that you can progress, and these are cultures within certain organizations. You can progress as long as you don't give somebody else an elbow. But there are cultures that, in fact, reward you if you actually give somebody else an elbow. So I think your point around values is really important in here, because it's the values that actually be driving that beautiful tension that happens within an organization, because out of that tension, good things happen.
Absolutely. And I look at that in two areas in I don't agree, Ali. I just want to quickly try and surmise the both. But one is, it's in context of corporate values frameworks, actually. And you look at the FTSE 100, and they're all of on average 4 values frameworks. Now, how they've been arrived at, I wouldn't know. But of course, those values are used to shape, or certainly should be used to shape, all of your decision making. So you should be guided by those values in your day-to-day life. Of course, they should therefore cascade or enculturate really the teams in the business. Now, there's an interesting conflict in there for me in context of present day business requirements, and it goes back to, it goes to the D&I and equality conversation, which is now demanded more than ever, isn't it? Particularly in post-pandemic times, and all of the stuff that's come in train along with that, increasing of the wealth gap, Black Lives Matter, etc. And so if you think about the narrow corporate values framework, is that really now relevant when businesses demand diversity? And it just can't be diversity of race, gender, sexuality, religion, etc. It's got to be about diversity of cultures, opinions, beliefs, ideas,
and thoughts. Yeah.
So therefore, do you want everybody to conform, if you like, to your narrow values framework of 4 qualities by which you act? The argument, you could probably lodge a particularly powerful argument to say, no, that we need to rip that approach up. And then if you do, therefore, you need to think, well, what are the values that I require? And can I assemble a team with radically differing sets of values, individually speaking, but that can act collaboratively to get things done in a good way? And in context of that, you might want someone who has, is thrusting as an ambitious, and then you might want another who is collaborative and turns down their competitive nature, if you like. So that was an interesting thought. And then I tried to crystallize that going back to Darwinian things, to think in context of thinking of your teams as, and I call the process being more Finch, to be more Finch. And it's a reference to Darwin's, which are very famous finches. He when he was on his travels, he you probably know, spent a bit of time on the Galapagos Islands. Very isolated set of islands, and they've evolved their own unique ecosystem. And they had there were 13 different 13 variations of the finch, which was the famous Darwin's famous finches. And in that small ecosystem, they'd all evolved. Although they were finches, they'd all evolved slightly different characteristics to enable them to live together in that environment with limited resources. And some of them evolved the ability to eat seeds, others to evolve to eat cactus. So different lengths of beaks and claws to enable them to thrive. So if you think about that in context of a team that you might want to assemble for a collaboration exercise, then you can start thinking of your finches. So who are my insect eaters? Who are my seed eaters? Who are my cactus eaters? Do you know what I mean? So it's so there was that thing about looking at so your project is the Galactus. I'm stretching a metaphor really, really badly here, but your project or collaboration exercise or negotiation is the Galapagos, and the team. And again, going back to the original start of the conversation, group negotiation, group disagreement, and who are the ideal team with complementary values, qualities and abilities that you need to put together to solve the disagreement. So,
and that happens also at the recruitment level, isn't it?
Yes.
Yep. Absolutely. So when you recruit for whatever you need rather than a full-time equivalent.
I did get to an exercise. The recruitment's interesting, and we did try, and I did drive this, and it did take a while to convince the HR to try this out. But I began to look at people's experience in a work context and their achievements at work and their career thus far, and their specialization, if you like. What was it that they actually did for a business as secondary to their actual values? And then working on the notion, and you will have heard this before, that most CVs are a fabulous work of fiction.
Of course.
Is that I then encourage, and again, this was entry-level candidates. It may not work with more senior types, but I did try it, was to rip up their CV and then repurpose all of their achievements at work and in life under their own personal values framework. And I said, ignore the values we publish on our sites. What are your own values? And this was, again, the values outing thing. And that was interesting in itself, because it transpires that most people haven't got, certainly not committed to writing, and I include myself in this at the time, their own personal values framework. It's definitely true to say that we all understand when something intrinsically cuts against the grain, something isn't right, if you like.
Yeah.
That's an innate understanding. But if you had to then give yourself 4 or 5 personal values, your own, you might struggle. You'd have to give it some thought. So you have to go away and think about it, and then commit it to writing. And then in committing to writing, it becomes almost like a vision of your future self. This is the person I aspire to be, even though I may not live up consistently to all of these values in my personal values framework. So it gives you a blueprint for your own behavior, and therefore a goal to aim for in terms of the person I want to evolve to be in the future. And we had some fabulous CVs that came once people started taking a run at that exercise. It was people really enjoyed it.
That's a fantastic exercise, because values are actually more sustainable. They are more authentic, and they're going to show up. Values are actually attached to potential as well. And you are more at ease if you're driven by, they are your guardrails. So you made me think talking about it, because I do have 2 or 3 values that I always talk about, and I'm not ashamed of them. These things make a huge difference if you actually know what your values are and personal values. In the book, you talk about something called the Pride Diet. Do you want to give us a summary of what you mean by that very quickly?
in organisational life, I guess the tinder, if you like, that would spark the most heat and therefore fire, and would be a barrier to effective collaboration inside an organisation, was an affront to our pride, if you like, and pride became, it's quite a complex. It's a really complex emotion, pride, and it was about reflecting on when our pride is affronted and how often we display pride in our daily lives, particularly at work. And in finding more about that, there are a couple of qualities of pride. One's negative and one's positive. And again, going back to lots of academic research that I had to read up on. And so one, for instance, was called the psychological structure of pride. It describes one aspect of it called hubristic pride, which, and there are lots of qualities that go hand in hand with that, competitiveness being one of them, but disagreeableness being another, narcissism, and boastfulness at the extremes of that. So they're all qualities that can lead to problematic relationships. But the academics were asserted that it would be that type of pride is a rapid shortcut to providing status inside communities, inside organizations, by comparison to the other type of pride, which is called authentic pride, which is has a disposition for long-term effort, and in particular conscientiousness. So if you're taking pride in doing something, that actually isn't negative. It's a positive.
It's a positive force.
Yeah, you're applying a degree of conscientiousness and diligence to a task. So the academics would say, so if someone lacks, if you like, those prestige-based qualities, so conscientiousness to succeed, then a person can cut straight to the front of the queue by coercion, aggression, assertive behaviour, thrusting, and overly ambitious behaviour. And in fact, that's sort of going back to what you were saying, Ali. It sort of is encouraged by organisations because they are hierarchical in nature. So therefore they drive competitive behavior above collaborative behavior just by notion, the fact that they have a hierarchy. And those two areas of pride are sort of interesting. So there was going back to hubristic pride to try and explain a little about what that means. It can be experienced when someone attributes the outcome and event to what is known as the global, and again, I'm quoting the academics here, global self. So for instance, if you get a degree, a first at Oxford, I haven't got one, by the way, and you would have experienced authentic pride if you knew you'd put in all the hard work, even though you weren't particularly academic in nature. You'd done the hard work, you'd done all the revision, you'd burnt the midnight oil while everybody went out or went out on the lash. And then you would experience authentic pride by the knowledge of the fact that you've achieved something that you thought was beyond your limits. Whereas hubristic pride is experienced when someone attributes the outcome, like getting a degree, to the global self, whereas because you're just so amazing. And you often come across people like that. Oh yeah, I'm fabulous. I'm here. I'm in the room. So that's the difference. And but interestingly, pride as a human quality, it definitely evolved. And going back to competitive nature, as a means to communicate our benefits to the group. And pride instinctively, and there's a phenomenon called the pride display. And that is you'll recognize this in most, if you watch football at the highest level, televised football, that erect display after a player scores a goal. Yeah. The audience, that is the pride display.
The victory.
And so there's an instinct to drive us to advertise our achievement. So those around us can evaluate whether or not we're worth having in the team. And instinctively, and people witnessing the pride display also have an evolutionary triggered true response to that. And that is called, there's a theory in that called the advertisement recalibration theory. And so when someone just broadcasts the fact that they've achieved something that's worthwhile having, everybody else in the room recalibrates their view of that person. Now, of course, it can be negative and it could be positive, but it actually reinforces views whether this person is worth having on the team or not. So as such, that can cause a lot of conflict in organizational and hierarchical life. And we are all genetically predisposed to do this. It's part of our drive to survive, if you like. So I therefore thought, well, a pride diet might be an interesting exercise. If we recognize that we're all prone to that sorts of behaviors, whether it's a lesser or to a larger degree, then actually recognizing when that happens in our daily life at work might be useful. And also because a person isn't necessarily drawn to one type of pride, hubristic or authentic, a person is capable of displaying both of those or harboring to those either in different occasions, depending on the circumstances, or in quick succession. So I thought it might be worth an exercise to drive down those pride-based threats to collaboration, effective collaboration in business, by being able to identify when we are doing the pride display, if you like, and what is it that's driving that? Is it hubristic in nature or is it authentic?
Yes.
And it was a bit like a journey of self-discovery. And it was essentially an exercise where you take note, okay, I'm now driven to anger. What is the reason behind that? Am I trying to, thrust myself into the room, put me ahead of this particular team? And what is it that's driving the behavior? And then doing a mental checklist at the end of each day. And then thinking, okay, yeah, and then beginning to establish a pattern of your own behaviors in context of group dynamics. And then attempting, if you're more prone, if you like, to the hubristic type of pride and the tactic of more assertiveness, coercion, more aggression in achieving your ambitions at work, and then sort of attempting to reduce that again in an intellectual way as opposed to an emotional way. So that was the pride diet, and there isn't a technique in the book. I don't agree that.
And those techniques you've called behaviour switches, right?
Yes, it's about a switch of your own behaviour. Again, it's acknowledging your own faults in any, and again, it's that a bit of self-examination. The examining life, the unexamined life, etc., and arriving at a true picture of yourself, and then setting that against the person you may want to be. And I think generally speaking, everybody wants to be. Does everybody want to be? I was going to say kinder is one of those values, isn't it, that gets bandied around a lot. And certainly we could do with more kindness in business. And it certainly isn't a value that exists on any corporate values framework. And it is an aspiration for me to be kinder in life, in community, in my family, in my friendship groups, etc.
Yeah, I look at it at both. I need to be kind and tolerant. And these are an exercise that I've been coached to do, which is every time there's a meeting that potentially can have conflict, I write down what I want to achieve out of the meeting and stuff that is going to be good for the team and for the business rather than just me individually. And then when I step away and it finishes, I need to reimagine the whole spectacle, and I need, as if it's actually a movie in front of me, and I need to observe my own behavior in the meeting, and which is you stepping away, and that's part of the self-reflection. And if you do it often, then you'll be comfortable with the exercise that even when you see yourself not being authentic or actually attacking the man rather than the ball, you actually become comfortable with it, and then you start thinking about what am I going to do better next time? Or actually I can go back to that person and say, I've reflected on this. I'm actually interested to hear more about your thinking around this particular topic or problem or proposed solution. And that's when you become, your level of self-awareness becomes better, I suppose, over the years.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I love your use of the football to create a metaphor, attacking the man, not the ball. I like that. I'm going to have to use that.
I say I'm in the business of everybody's got an opinion on. So every time I suggest a way to communicate, there's always going to be somebody saying, actually, no, I don't, especially when it comes to words, presentations, solutions. And over the years, I've always accepted that my opinion is one, but it's coming from an expert, but I need to listen to the other person because they're actually embedded within the organization or they've been doing the same job over a long period of time. So I have to listen to their point of view as well. But the idea is that every time you go to one of those conversations, you try not to be the target. You try to focus on the topic.
Totally. Yeah.
So then it becomes more productive. You can disagree on the topic, but try to avoid that disagreement about the person rather than about the topic.
And also to allow other people into the room as well. Yes. I think there's sort of bit of ritualistic behaviour that I got into, and again, I describe it in the book. There's a mind game that, a thought exercise more correctly, and it was again to establish the in my own personal attempt to establish my own faults, if you like, in management and leadership roles, and were there a couple of aspects of my character that I could probably shed in advance of any coming together of minds, any meeting, any negotiation, any contract agreement. And I got into thinking about the two worst aspects of look, I don't want to labour on the negative, but I encourage everybody to not just think about their worst traits. We've all got good traits too. So what are those that need to come to the fore? But in terms of the worst stuff, I was thinking there were a couple of things I could shed in advance of any group negotiation or any meeting. And I started playing a little mind game, and I do write it in the book. And it worked for me. It was uniquely personal. I'm not suggesting anybody else does this, but it was. So I am competitive in nature, and I do like to assert I do like to, I guess. And again, I'm going to speak about it in simplistic terms and paint myself in a really bad light. But yeah, I've liked to have been at the centre of things, making things happen. And I definitely do like to be right. I do get that warm glow, if you like, when someone says, yes, that's right, Michael. And so those two things could be positive in one sense, but they could be negative around the table in a group negotiation. So I thought about a mind exercise where I imagined those two things. They're fairly flamboyant, as flamboyant outer garments. I wore them. I used to have this really flamboyant purple, suede-like, velvety-like dinner jacket, and I did you wear it to quite a lot of ad industry dues when we're going up to work. So they're lovely pieces of tailoring, obviously, but they're just out there. They sort of look at me. Do you know what I mean? And I wore that a lot. I didn't wear it in daily life, but I did wear it to those sorts.
Certainly
of
no diet and attention.
Yeah. Anyway, so I imagined in advance of any meeting, I imagined a coat check outside the room, and I imagined this flamboyant aspect of my character, this competitive nature, and I'd take that off in my mind and hand it to the person at the coat check. So it's a very physical appearance. It wasn't physical, it was mental, but I could picture that and envision that. And I took that off before, literally just outside the meeting room. So I had those mental thoughts in my mind. And then I realized it became even more strong when I imagined the person who was taking the coat as to be my wife, Katie, who obviously knows me really, really well. And so in theory, at least, loves me warts and all. So takes the good with the bad. And then said, so she, in a sense, she's demanding that I take off those bad aspects before I go into this room full of people. So she became the coat check in my mind's eye. And then of course she might then, knowing me as she does, raise a bit of an eyebrow, go, well, yeah, but your competitive nature, that's not enough. Maybe there's another garment that you need to be taking off, and that would be. And that is, again, that need to be right, if you like, that sort of plight for being endorsed by the people in the room, if you like. Yeah. And again, and I imagine that as another, aspect of whatever I was wearing. I imagine that one as the one I take off first. And I imagined it as a big overcoat that I used to own when I was a lot younger. And it was really, had padded elbows, big shoulders. So great for sort of nudging people out of the way, if you like, you know what I mean? So I guess a bit like that famous Donald Trump moment, where is it the G20, the G8, and he it
was the G8, and he pushed the.
He's from the back of that assembly of leaders.
Yes, he pushed. He was
horrible, and then you can see him. He's got that pride display bit. You can see he does that. So I guess I was thinking that it's certainly in my memory that he's wearing a big sort of overcoat type thing.
Yeah.
And he's a big guy anyway, isn't he? Physically, he's that. So I take that off, and that's sort of just landing that. It sort of sets my mindset as I go into the room full of people. For me, it's a more collaborative. It sets my mindset to be more open, collaborative, if you like. Yeah.
We are coming to the end of the podcast. I want to ask you a quick couple of questions. You've written the book and you've got a team of people that work in your organization. Are they more aware now of disagreements?
Well, listen, funnily enough, when I wrote the book and when the book came out, I was still in my previous organization. And like I say, across the board on there were 4,000 people in that. It certainly did what I wrote there. I'd like to think that it influenced the culture, and I'd sort of, and obviously it rose out of my evolving management style. So certainly the person the entrepreneur, the founder, the want of a better word, leader, the manager that I started out in life, I think there's a lot of flawed stuff in there. And I sort of set me off on a personal evolutionary journey to be better at all of those things. I'm certainly nowhere near where I should be. And as I say at the end of the book, if I get things right 50% of the time, then that will still be an improvement on where I am now. So it is that. And I like to think that it influenced certainly my area of the organisation. I couldn't say whether it did or not, which is why I've sort of tried to take it out into the wider business world, doing things like this. It won Leadership for the Future award at the business. It won gold for the Leadership for the Future award at the Business Book Awards 2021, so early this year in May. And
fantastic.
So I see that it's landing and resonating, but it's a long-term goal, this I Don't Agree. I might have to do I Don't Agree too. For it to land, and it's ultimately it's a way of thinking, it's a perspective, and as rightly so, others may have views that are different to mine, and we just accept that. But it does seem to land currently, and certainly in the organisation I've now founded, that my team is very, very small. So I've gone from what was from being in the leadership team of an organisation of 4,000 people, 20 offices, 32 offices in 20 countries, to a very small startup with 5 people in it. Am I a bit too old nowadays to maybe start doing this all again? I'm not quite sure, but certainly the business that I'm trying to get off the ground is about doing kinder, fairer, more equal business in a cleaner world. And it's taking a new look at marketing services and the way that we look at humanity, which previously to the pandemic, big business tended to look at humanity through one lens, and that was the lens of consumption as consumers. And if you think about that, that's dicing and slicing the entirety of humanity by how they shop, which on reflection, that's never been the right way, has it, from a professional point of view, to look at humanity. So there's got to be a better way of doing business. And I'm trying to switch that descriptor from a consumer to community. And community is also a word that's been bandied around since certainly in the society that's emerging post-pandemic, that we are closer to, we need to get close to community. But thinking about audiences as communities, and of course the beauty of communities is that there are myriads of them, many of them, and you can identify a community need that big business could step into to help. And in simplistic terms, that might be digital poverty, for instance. We've seen, haven't we, education since the pandemic has gone hugely remote in terms of it's online. And we also see that lots of people are excluded by that through economic circumstance. They haven't got multiple devices at home. They haven't got a stable internet connection. They haven't got the latest computer equipment. So digital poverty is an emerging problem, and you can feel that there are quite a lot of commercial enterprises, brands that may be able to step into that to help. Again, I'm oversimplifying, but digital poverty. Well, Microsoft have got to be invested in that, as have Cisco, as have IBM, as have Dell, as have Apple, etc., etc. So there's a new way of forging relationships with your communities that isn't about trying to flog them something. It's about so that might be the new way, hopefully, of doing capitalism, if you like, in the future.
Community is a great purpose. I definitely, over the last couple of years, I've actually experienced it, and I love it. Because you can see the effort and the results of your work out there in the community, and that's really a great motivator to keep going and add value and contribute as well. You'll be in a very lucky position and this is why I think public sector can be really a very rewarding situation where you earn a living, but also you're contributing to the community. And you don't just look at somebody as how many pieces of, clothes they've bought from me, and that's about it. One last thing for you, Michael. I work in the business of change and communication, where there's always going to be fields full of minds of disagreement.
Yeah.
What would be your advice to people in my profession when we go into proposing new solutions or running a collaboration session? What would be your advice?
I think it can only go back to the self-examination, really, Ali, because, you ultimately, other people are generally speaking beyond your control.
Yes.
And unpredictable. So there's an internal leveling up required. And obviously one is the acceptance of that, but it's also your way of doing change may not necessarily be the right thing or the right fit, depending on the cultural circumstances. And again, trying to, without fully understanding them, I would urge everyone to try and take perspective, to put yourself in the shoes of all the people who are receiving your wisdom, if you like, in the full knowledge that they may not accept it as wisdom. And the other thing, of course, about change management, and obviously you will know this, and it's fairly well acknowledged that people are generally speaking fear change. And there's one little phenomena that is worth mentioning, going back to some of those psychological phenomena that I discovered, thinking about affirmation state, attribution bias and such like that. But the instinctive threat system, I don't know if you know about this, Ali, but it's an internal alarm. It warns us to danger by creating feelings of anxiety, fear, aversion. And it does that in order to motivate us to some kind of action. So it triggers our fight-flight response. For instance,
that happens in the amygdala, survival mode. Yeah,
absolutely. But because it's a hardwired thing, it doesn't necessarily need a moment of danger to trigger it, because we're biased towards processing threat-based information. So it captures our attention more powerfully than positive information. And of course, you can't help but thinking of change management as threat-based information. It's a challenge to our status quo. It needs us a bit of thinking, creativity to get over the initial wobbles. Yeah. So threat-based information captures our attention more powerful. And we are subconsciously vigilant to it at all times. So it permeates our interactions with family, with friends, with colleagues, teammates, bosses. And for some of us, the smallest criticism of our actions or the smallest threat to the status quo can get the adrenaline running, and that has its attendant physical bodily reactions, so increased heart rate, sweating, anxiety, and even outright hostility to the other person or the people in the room. Yeah. So, and again, a great way of remembering this, thinking about bias processing threat-based information, is that if you think back to your last performance review, I don't know when the last time you had one of those, Ali. Yeah, great stuff. Well, look, but your memory of that is great. But for most people, your memory of in the aftermath of that, the aren't necessarily the superlatives that are used to describe your good bits.
Yeah.
All the good stuff that's about, but it's the areas for improvement that stick in the mind. And it's that negative bias that triggers those threat-based emotions, fear, anger, and that motivates us to protect ourselves. And that might result, after thoughtful consideration and a deep breath or two, in an attempt to improve on our weaknesses. But it could be the other way. It could go the other way. It could be, slamming a fist onto the table.
Of course, yeah.
And back to Donald Trump again. Thank God. Well, hopefully consigned to the dustbin of history, but who knows? But slamming a fist in launching angry missiles. I perceived thinking about Donald Trump, and he's always on Twitter, wasn't he?
And you actually talked about the performance review. You don't even need to get to the performance review. Any piece of feedback triggers that alarm. Michael, we're coming to the end of the podcast. I thoroughly am enjoying the conversation, and we definitely went over time. But it's been a pleasure having you in my podcast, Michael. Your book, I Don't Agree, really worthwhile reading, and I encourage all my listeners to actually get a copy of that. How do they get a copy of your book?
It is available in so obviously on Amazon. There's also direct from the publisher, which is Harriman House.
Yeah.
Well, they are UK based.
Yeah. I think I know the publisher. I'm going to put the notes, the information on the podcast as well. I definitely know that's from Amazon. So, and if somebody wants to reach out to you, how do they reach out to you?
Well, they can. Yeah, my email is happily to share. It's just michael.brown@associate.co.uk.
And you are on LinkedIn as well.
On LinkedIn, yeah.
No, I certainly will put the right Michael Brown in the notes for the podcast. Hey, Michael, it's been a pleasure having you. I really appreciate your time. And I'm grateful as well to connect with you. And hopefully we're going to get together in the new year, and maybe we'll tackle another topic.
Absolutely. I enjoyed it too. Yeah, really, really good. It'd be good to know more about your change management stuff as well in the future. If I can help with that, I'll, I don't know, maybe there's a business opportunity there, Ali.
Absolutely, certainly. Until next time, Michael, stay well and stay safe.
Brilliant. You too.
Thank you. Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of the Inner Game of Change podcast. To know more about our guests and this episode, check out the innergameofchange.com.au website, and remember to subscribe. I can't wait to share with you the next episode. Until then, stay well and stay safe.